Hello, and welcome back to Lecture 10. In this lecture, we are going to discuss environmental ethics. In particular, we are going to um, talk about what should be our moral responsibilities toward the environment and the animals. Don't forget to read the article UN Urges Global Move to Meat and Dairy-Free Diet and watch the video 60-Second Climate Fix. This lecture is going to be very long, so I will break it down into part 1 and part 2. This is part 1. Okay, so let's start considering our responsibilities to the animals, what we do to animals. And the question would be whether what we do to animals or what we allow other people to do to animals is moral. I'm going to warn you that there are a few images you might not like, but you can always turn off the video or turn the other way. But I promise they're not very, very gross. You can handle it. And this lecture, I guess, can be started with a roasted dog on a platter. And I call this presentation Outlaw Meat. Now, as I said, we should focus on the question, what are the moral obligations of the livestock sector toward the environment, not to mention to the animals. And also, we should think about our responsibilities, what we ought to do, and what responsibilities do we have toward the environment and to the animals. Yeah, these are questions that we don't normally think about, but we should think about the fact that our diets, normal standard American diets with meat and dairy products, is causing environmental degradation, tremendous environmental degradation, as we'll see. And also it jeopardizes our health, but also the health of those who do not consume animal products, the so-called vegetarians or vegans. It also causes unnecessary suffering to animals. This is very simple. It's not a secret that in order to eat meat, we have to allow animals to suffer. There's no other way. It is true that some people say that some animals are treated humanely, but essentially that's just a mask to say that they are in fact suffering. The only way to treat animals humanely, if you think about it, is to allow them to do the things that are natural to them, which are basically food, freedom, and enjoyment. And there's no way that any animal agriculture would ever allow animals these three things. Now, what do most people say? And I don't want to make fun of people or meat eaters. It's just the next slide just gives a taste of what most people, but an exaggerated, if you will, picture of what most people say or think about the question of meat. Now, I'm not suggesting that people think this way because for example, they are ignorant. Well, actually, yes, they do. They are ignorant. They are ignorant about the treatment of animals, and they are ignorant about nutrition. But this doesn't mean that they are bad people. It doesn't mean that they will never learn or they cannot learn. But it's a matter of some degree of ignorance about ethics, about a proper treatment of animals, and the environment. So most people, like this guy, think that eating meat, using animals for food, it's only a matter of necessity. Like this guy saying, I'm hungry, I need to eat. But in reality, when we study science, we study the science of nutrition, we immediately learn, and this is not a complicated matter that requires higher degrees, but we learn that the human body does not require meat or any animal products like eggs, milk, cheese to survive. There's nothing in the human body, the way we are made, human beings, that suggests that there is a requirement for animal products. In fact, to the contrary, there are many indications that we do not, as a species, do very well consuming animal products, and we, in fact, do better, live better, and thrive when we consume more vegetables and more fresh fruit. It is even silly that I have to even make this point, which is common sense, that human beings thrive on fresh greens and vegetables and fruit. Now, in the next illustration, then the the guy with the knife says, "But look, meat is tasty. Animal products are tasty." So many people believe that it's only a matter of taste, but when you reflect, morally speaking, it's not a matter of taste, because if I behaved consistent with the way I like, following my personal taste, I would thereby do many things that are very immoral. And so this should be a very non-controversial, that we do not act in morality in ways that satisfy our personal preferences. Morality requires more than personal preferences. It requires reasoning, good reasoning too. So now, in a third vignette, what happens is that another excuse given by the guy with the knife is that that he understands that people don't get him, but it's a personal choice. And once again, it's not a personal choice, especially as we'll see when it affects the lives of billions of animals and also the lives of billions of human beings and the earth and the environment and so on. There are certain things that are just not a personal choice. Just because they are legal, they are permitted, they're not a personal choice. The point of my presentation, and also, by the way, the point of my research, is to argue that it is enough, and we have to actually now make it illegal to use animal products, so people can no longer say it's my personal choice. It is clearly not a personal choice. So now in the fourth cartoon, in the fourth vignette, now the guy with the knife resorts to the excuse, well, lions eat zebras. Okay, there are certain animals in nature that eat meat, so I don't see anything wrong with eating meat. But when you think about it, there are also a lot of animals that do not eat meat, such as, well, cows, the very zebras that the guy is talking about, rabbits. Okay, many animals don't eat meat, don't eat animals. So why should we use lions as reference? Why should we use lions to the argument that it is right to eat animals because there are carnivore animals? Well, there are also animals that are not carnivore. Besides, as the other guy in the fifth vignette points out, lions kill to survive, but we don't. We are not in a situation, most people in most countries in the world, in affluent countries in the world, people like you and me, especially if you're watching this video right now, chances are you don't have to kill to survive. Chances are you can pause this video and go to your kitchen and open the fridge and eat food, or go to the store and purchase some food. So then the next excuse is that it's the oldest and probably the most, actually, scratch the probably, it is the most ridiculous excuse that a meat eater can conjure up to justify eating animals. And that is that we need proteins. No one is disputing that we need proteins, but to suggest that the only way to get proteins is by killing animals and consuming their flesh is just ridiculous. Just think about those animals that do not eat meat, like gorillas, elephants, zebras. They don't require meat, so there's no need to eat meat for that reason. And so in the last vignette, then unfortunately the guy with the knife is not convinced by the argument, and so the guy who's tied down tries his last resort, which is, just think about it. Don't you care about me? Don't you care about other people? Aren't you compassionate enough to think if all else fails, at least just think about the fact that I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die. But obviously the guy with the knife doesn't understand it, doesn't get the problem, and says, I love you, in fact. But just because I kill you doesn't mean that I don't love you. And this seems funny because it is, in fact, the argument given by many meat eaters who say, but I do love animals. Just because I allow other people to slaughter them, I don't mean that, it doesn't mean that I don't love them. I do love them. So as you can see, this lecture is going to be very thought-provoking. It's going to push your buttons. But this is good. This is good because that's how you think. That's how you reflect. When your buttons are pushed, you have to turn on your critical, your logical mind. So what about politicians? What about most politicians, not all politicians, of course. I hope there might be some sensible politicians. But most politicians, and especially lately, have not responded well to the problem of the environment. And there's a big problem. We raise animals for food. There are too many. We are bringing into existence too many animals. And they use our natural resources, our food, and they unfortunately, they cause tremendous environmental degradation. We're talking about pollution of waters, pollution of soil, the climate change, and many others. But politicians don't seem to care very much. They seem, obviously, it's their business of caring about, well, their interests, first of all, and also caring about being reelected. And for some reason, this idea of the environment is not very popular. And this, I have to say, well, this will take an entire different lecture, and we don't have time for that. But some of the reasons why people tend not to care so much about the environment is because the environment and environmental concerns are constantly downgraded and played down by the media, by the politicians. They made fun of by people. As soon as you talk about concern about the environment, people say, "Oh, you're a tree hugger, you're a hippie," and so there's this culture of, or I should say, counterculture that goes against the basic understanding of how to treat the environment and other animals. And also there's this idea that we human beings are the most important beings in the universe. Kant is also in part responsible of that, Immanuel Kant, if you remember, because according to Kant, human beings are just beautiful because they reason. They are made by God. And there's nothing more beautiful than human beings. Animals, unfortunately, cannot talk or reason like us, so they are of secondary importance. And that's what most people believe. And it's very hard to change people's minds. And I'm not here to change your mind. If you think that animals are inferior, all I can do is to show you that they are not. But then it's up to you to think about it. But what I urge you to do is to think about it, not just to continue to hold your belief about morality just because it was given to you by your parents, by your peers, by your society. Just think critically. Human beings are here on earth, but we are not the most important things in life. And the fact that we have reason, whether God gave us reason or nature gave us reason, is a very important indication that we should have a higher moral responsibility. And so we have to think about our surroundings, our environment, our animals, because they are part of the environment. But some people, as I said before, especially some politicians, try to play it down and say it's not that bad, that it requires really attention, at least right now, when we're thinking about North Korea and we're thinking about Iraq and so on. We shouldn't really worry so much about the environment. But how bad is it? Well, what I want to suggest is that it is so bad, the situation, and if you read the article that I assigned about the United Nations suggesting that we move toward a diet devoid of animal products, a vegetarian diet, a total vegetarian diet. If you read those kinds of articles and many other articles like that, you realize that the situation is pretty bad. And with the next slide, I think we could end our lecture, but it's not the end. But that's, I think, it suffices to give a sense of how bad and how urgent our situation is. The point is that we can no longer continue doing what we're doing. And the only solution to our problems seems to be that we discontinue animal farming and we become vegetarians. That's really the best option. Now, in this slide, as you can see, in this slide, the point of this slide is that the number of animals that are killed for food in the US alone, last year in 2018, 2 years ago, was 55 billion and change. Now think about this for a moment. This large number might not mean anything to you, but think about how many animals we have to bring into existence just for the taste of eating meat. 55 billion. Now, I just want to urge you to take a second and to pause and reflect and tell me whether this represents anything beautiful, anything honorable, anything virtuous about human beings. Suppose that we are visited by aliens, and they want to see the achievements of humanity. I don't know. Maybe you might point to the library and show them the achievements of literature, of science, of philosophy. Maybe you can show them the Nicomachean Ethics or Immanuel Kant's Ethics. Maybe you can show them the Empire State Building, the Freedom Tower, the Declaration of Independence. But what about this? Are you going to show them this? I think this is something that we cannot be proud of. It's really embarrassing. 55 billion animals are killed every year on average, and only because meat tastes good. There's no other really significant and important reason why we're doing it. Only because it tastes good. Now, what do we do with animals? I'm going to go over these next few slides quickly because it is important, but it's not essential to the overall argument. But it gives a sense of what we do to animals, and the sense that I want to come across is the idea that we have devalued animals to the point where we are willing to do all kinds of absurd things and also cruel things to them because we no longer view animals as what they are, but we view animals as objects that we can use and exploit the way we want. We use animals, they use animals to produce, for example, fabric softener. This obviously is not necessary. We can do it any other way. Also, we use animals, specifically insects, like bugs. You see this bug here in the photo is the cochineal insect. They take thousands of them, they boil them, and they obtain a red dye, the same red dye that you find in your beverages, food. Pay attention next time you eat something, you drink something, and you read the ingredients, and it says natural red, or red 4, or crimson lake, or carmine, or anything like that. Unless it says the coloring is from beets or strawberries or whatnot, chances are that food or a beverage was colored by using boiled insects. Also, the most shiny things, for example, wood finishing, varnishing. Sometimes they use it to coat fruits like apples, vegetables, also candies, pastries, many other things. They use this little insect known as shellac or Cariolaca. They also boil them or dry them, and they use them to make things shine. And wine and beer and other alcoholic beverages, with the production of these beverages, they use certain enzymes that collect the impurities, the sediments of wine and beer, for example. And these are essentially ground up fish bladders. Also, the flu vaccine, if you think about it, is essentially the influenza, which is injected into the eggs. Then the virus is removed and purified and injected into essentially you when you get the flu vaccine from a pharmacy or your doctors. Also, cigarettes. Who would have thought? It's not enough that smoking cigarettes will kill you, but also they use pig blood in making an enzyme, once again, that's supposed to remove the toxins from the smoke before it enters the lungs. Obviously, it's not enough because people die of cancer from smoking cigarettes. Yes, and it's easier to quit smoking. Also, animals are used to produce glue. Um, all this kind of glue, for example. Now, we don't need to kill animals to produce glue, by the way, but all this glue is produced with animal fat or animal blood. Also in cosmetics, as I said, in cosmetics, for example, in lipsticks, to make the lipstick shine, they use what is called pearl essence, which is obtained from fish scales. And horse urine is used in some medicines. For example, this medicine Premarin, which is the the urine of horses. And motor oil, green motor oil, is made with essentially animal fats, beef fat. Animal fat is often used in baked goods, such as breads, pastries. Fortunately, not all baked goods use animal products. Now, if you asking me why do they use animal products, well, for taste and to make pastries softer. And this is my favorite one. This little cute animal is the beaver. In Latin is the castorium. So castorium is a substance that is obtained, as you can see on the right photo. There are the shriveled glands, anal glands of beavers. The male apparently has these glands because they emanate an odor that attracts the females. Now, castorium is this secretion from these sacs, from these glands, and also combined with the urine of this animal. And what they do with this is that they use the substance mixed with the urine as natural flavoring. Now, believe it or not, this natural flavor tastes like vanilla. I don't want to find out, but you probably found out many times when you ate things that say natural vanilla flavoring. When it says natural vanilla flavoring, if it doesn't say pure vanilla is used in this pastry, chances are what they mean is castorium. And you find these in beverages, pastries, ice cream, all kinds of sweets that taste like vanilla. Or, by the way, magically, this secretion, this product, also tastes like strawberry. It imitates the strawberry flavor. Now, in addition to these absurd practices of using animals for essentially, let's say, most or virtually all aspects of life, from shoes to pillows to soap to softener to flavoring and so on. Also, 100 million animals are killed in laboratories every year. Now, I know that what you're thinking. Probably you're thinking, but animal experimentation, come on, is needed, isn't it? Think about this. There are many experiments that are conducted by scientists who are trivial. They're not so important. Just think about the fact that there are experiments that are completely useless and trivial. Like, for example, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was conducted by the U.S. government. This was an experiment done by using uneducated people from the South. They were injected the syphilis, and although the doctors knew what syphilis was and they had the cure, but the experiment was continued by the government just to for the sake of doing it, for the sake of what happens by doing it. And recently, the government officially apologized for that little evil mistake, and to the survivors were given a couple of $1,000 as an apology. But my point is that it is don't assume that experiments, scientific experiments, all of them at least are done, are conducted for the good of humanity, because most of them are inaccurate, they're trivial, and they're useless. So why do they conduct experiments? Well, because laboratories in big universities require experimentation to justify the endowment given to them by the government. If you don't conduct research, what kind of hospital do you run? You have to conduct research. And so furthermore, another point about research is that a lot of this research is not really effective because you are experimenting on animals, and human beings are very different from animals. As a matter of fact, a lot of experiments, a lot of medicine, for example, that is experimented. Of course, this is not something that they announce every day on the newspapers or make explicit. They hide this. But if you investigate, of course, you learn about these things. There are many examples of medicine that was experimented on animals because all medicine by law has to be experimented, tested on animals to see the reaction. If it has a bad reaction, then it's not fit for human beings. But unfortunately, the problem is that many medicines, many drugs have been experimented and tested on animals where they don't have any effect on the animals. So once those medicine and those drugs were introduced into the market and then consumed by, administered to human beings, then they had deleterious effects. And so those medicines and drugs have been recalled, have been eliminated, and discontinued. That tells you that when you experiment something on rats, for example, or on monkeys, you don't have good analogs to extrapolate the information and apply it to human beings, because we are very different. So what applies to rats need not apply to human beings. But animals like these, monkeys, dogs, etc., and if you do an investigation online, you can just Google it. It's very simple. You can get the number of thousands of animals that are subjected to torture, essentially. Breathing fumes. For example, cigarette companies, which, if you ask me, they're morally questionable as businesses in the first place because they sell death in the form of cigarettes. Well, they use dogs to experiment their cigarettes, to test their cigarettes, so they make him breathe cigarette smoke. Now, I don't want to breathe cigarette smoke. Why should we use dogs? Why should we subject dogs to that? Just, it blows my mind. So most of these experiments, as I said, are trivial. For example, they inject dyes in the eyes of monkeys to see what happens. They drown bears in oil to see the reaction. They give LSD to elephants to study drugs. You have no idea how many absurd and cruel experiments are conducted and animals are subjected to. Just think about one thing. Think about the fact that these experiments, the atrocities that they inflict on these poor animals, innocent animals, are not advertised. And there's a reason why. Because they are very cruel. And people would probably protest. More people would protest. But unfortunately, we are not informed. And why are we not informed? Well, we're going to talk about this in part 2 of this presentation. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, what we do to animals, is to consider factory farms. When you go to the store and buy animal products, such as meat, eggs, cheese, honey, etc., well, those products come from factory farms. It is true that some ads on TV perhaps try to make us believe that happy cows, that the animals are happy, or their turkeys roam free and so on. They're cruelty free. But essentially, factory farms is animal agriculture is a pre-cutthroat business. There's nothing compassionate about factory farms. Nothing good happens in factory farms. Just think about that. But also fish farms. People often forget that fish are animals as well, and they are also exploited, and there's a lot of cruelty involved in raising fish. By the way, I just wanted to mention, whether you buy organic or not organic, organic only means that they feed these animals organic food, organic feed. That's the only thing that it means. But the treatment is the same. And by law, animals can be subjected to painful and horrible treatment, such as tail docking, dehorning, hot iron branding, castration, and for birds, debunking. They use hot knives to cut off their beaks. They want to them from having pointy beaks, and so prevent injuries in farms, on farms. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that, animals are crammed into filthy cages without windows, And essentially they are deprived from what is natural to them. It is natural to them to raise their families, raise their children, to play, to build nests, to do anything that comes natural to that particular animal. So their lives essentially are spent in a cage, and they die young. They are not even allowed to continue. Well, for two reasons. One is because, well, it's business. You need to kill the animal and sell it. Secondly, because virtually every single animal that is slaughtered is sick. Imagine spending your lifetime in a cage, under unsanitary conditions, filthy, among thousands of other animals around you, feces, urine, and so on, and not being able to breathe fresh air and be exposed to the sunlight. So imagine what happens to you. You're going to get sick. You're going to develop some metabolic dysfunction and some literally sickness. So virtually all animals that are slaughtered for food are sick. Fish farms are not better than regular farms. Fish suffer from lesion and other injuries. These injuries are caused by the fact that the fish farms are essentially pools of water that are overcrowded. Overcrowded why? The same reason why factory farms are overcrowded, because they want to cram as many as possible. The more animals you can raise, the more money you can make. That's the only thing about animal agriculture. You might be thinking that animals are essential to our lives, that we need to eat animals, but in fact, factory farming, raising animals for food, has nothing to do with necessity, and it has everything to do with profit and more profit. Now, since these animals in factory farms and in fish farms, as I said, are sick, they are exposed to parasites, to viruses, to many sicknesses. They are given pesticides and antibiotics in order to destroy these parasites. Now, two things. One is that antibiotics, 90% of the antibiotics produced in the world are for animals, for factory farm animals. That's incredible, but it's true. And secondly, these pesticides and antibiotics do not disappear in thin air. They essentially are absorbed into the soil, which obviously you can think of the problem of that. It depletes the soil, it destroys the soil from natural minerals, and it prevents growing good and organic produce, for example. And they are consumed by people. Okay. And secondly, the fact that farmers introduce drugs and pesticides, what this leads to is that the evolution of parasites, because they become the next generations of parasites become drug resistant. So farmers must introduce stronger and stronger and stronger pesticides and drugs. And once again, as I said, all these drugs end up in the soil, in the waters, and it pollutes and it creates tremendous environmental degradation. So, next time they want to convince you that eating meat is your personal preference, it is your decision, and no one should tell you anything about your personal decision. Just think again, because it is not a matter of personal decision, but it's a matter of polluting the environment, polluting the water, polluting the soil, and causing all sorts of environmental degradation. Now, if you remember, one of my first slides was the slide that shows that every year roughly 55 billion animals are slaughtered, are killed for food every year. I remember I gave a lecture at a middle school, and some kids asked, "That's very cute." They asked, "But what do we do to these animals if we don't eat them?" They would overpopulate the world if we didn't eat them, and that is very cute because the kid doesn't realize that animals are so many, not because they reproduce that fast, but because they are artificially inseminated. Now, since you I hope and I assume that all of you watching this video lecture right now are over 18, I want to tell you how artificial insemination is done. And you can look it up if you don't want to take my word for it. But essentially, in animal agriculture, there are individuals whose job is to masturbate the male animal, collect the semen, and inject it or introduce it in the female. Now, when it comes to birds, if you can see the picture on the left side of the screen, that is a turkey. They are artificially inseminated by, as I said, there is a person, believe it or not, it might sound extravagant to you, but that's what human beings do. That is the practice. They masturbate the turkey and inseminate artificially the female, like that, by inserting a rod into the turkey. On the right side of the screen, however, there is an illustration of how artificial insemination is done to cows. Now, if you notice, the man in the picture is wearing a long plastic glove that covers his entire arm. And I let you imagine how artificial insemination is done in the case of cows. Now, I want to mention also the fact that fur and leather is not just found on the street, on the trees, but is obtained by the suffering of millions of animals. One nasty aspect of fur is that the animals are anally electrocuted, They essentially they insert a rod into the anus of these animals, and electrocute them, kill them that way, so they can recover the entire undamaged pelts of the animal. Now, I would just want to remind you that we are in the 21st century, and not in a stone age. We don't need a fur to cover our bodies. We certainly don't need leather. We can do very well living without leather, without fur, and by the way, without feathers, down, jackets, and so on. Now, the next topic that I want to discuss is the notion of food, of what we eat, because it seems to me, if you ask me, of course, it seems to me that a lot of the things that we consider food are not really food. We eat them. I mean, not I, but people eat them, and and so it's normal that in our society we consider these things as food. But when you think more critically about these foods, so-called foods, you realize that they're not really food, or they're not food for human beings. For example, think about milk. Milk is one of those products that it's so normal. If you watch movies, if you hear people discussion, husband and wife, honey, go to the store, buy a gallon of milk and some eggs and a head of lettuce. It's just so normal in every sense. And what I want to suggest is that it is not normal. I remember when I was a child, I didn't think that milk was normal because it is a liquid, a fluid secreted by a cow, and I remember very young age, I always thought it is weird that human beings drink milk, cow's milk, because it makes sense that it is food for the baby cow, but not for human beings. Why should we drink human? And what's interesting to me is that the milk the dairy industry is very pushy and is very convincing that that we need milk and dairy products for good health. You see these ads I see these ads on a train. Drink milk, it has calcium. But what if human beings didn't have cows? How do we get calcium? How do we get here to 2020? And human beings have been around for millions of years, or at least Homo sapiens has been around for roughly 400,000 years. How do we get here without calcium? Now you can say, well, but human beings, Homo sapiens, were drinking because they domesticated animals. Sure, but my point is the following. All the hundreds of thousands of years prior to animal domestication, where do we get the calcium? Where do we get the calcium from? So domestication of animals and using dairy products, it's something that comes later. Maybe 20,000 years ago, we started animal domestication and agriculture. But before that, where in the world did we get milk from? So the dairy industry tries very hard to convince us that you need milk to survive. But that's the food for cows, for baby cows, not for human beings. And in fact, why think that milk is food? When you look at the nutritional profile of milk, you realize it's clear, it's evident. You realize it is not food for humans. Look at the calories in a glass of milk. You need how many apples? You need I don't know, a couple of hundred apples to, no, maybe not 100 apples. You need at least 20 apples to get the same amount of calories, which you don't need so many calories. Sodium, 190 milligrams of sodium in a glass of milk, in a small glass of milk. Now, sodium, as you know, is not human food, and certainly we don't need that much. It's a mineral, but we don't need all that much. That's really a lot. And what about fat? 13 grams of fat. Who needs 13 grams of fat in 240 calories? Think about if you really eat all those apples, you get a fraction of that fat. And also saturated fat. This is the fat that blocks your arteries, and this is the fat that causes diabetes, by the way. So why would we need to drink milk which contains saturated fat? Who needs saturated fat? What about fiber? We need a lot of fiber. How much fiber you find in milk? 0 grams. What about cholesterol? I know that some people lately, I have heard that some people lately, especially YouTubers and some bloggers, go around saying people, don't worry about it, eat cholesterol. That is a very dangerous recommendation, and it's very irresponsible too. We know that excess cholesterol causes cancer, causes all kinds of problems. Why tell people to drink more cholesterol? It's very irresponsible. Now, is cow's milk human food? As you can see from this cartoon, this very funny cartoon, this wants you to reflect of the fact that human beings are the only animals that drink milk as adults. All the other animals move on. We are the only ones that we are convinced that we have to drink milk to survive. But what does producing dairies involve? Well, first of all, it involves, as I said, artificial insemination or forceful insemination of cows, followed by the separation of cows from their children, from calves. Now the calves, of course, a child asked me once, but if we drink the milk, what do baby cows drink? And unfortunately, the answer is that they are fed formula. They're fed formula because the milk is collected and sold in supermarkets. There's nothing, once again, there's nothing compassionate. There's nothing noble, virtuous. There's nothing good about forcing a cow to be pregnant, separating, taking away her baby, feeding the baby formula, and then taking the milk away and selling it for profit. Selling something, by the way, that is not essential or required by the human body. Now, what happens to calves? If they are females, they will be allowed to live because they will grow and have babies. But if they are males, they are slaughtered immediately and sold as veal. What about cows? Well, a cow, under normal circumstances, can live up to 25 years. But they are killed after 4 to 5 years, very young. Because they, as I said, they become sick, they become tired, they are spent, they say. They can no longer survive, and so they are slaughtered. Now, another item that is considered food is eggs. And now, I also remember when I was a child, I didn't want to eat eggs because, well, first of all, to me, it was weird that I had to eat something that comes out of the rear end of a chicken. And in fact, it's not food. It is the reproductive cycle of chickens. Not really food. But I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but eggs are good. Sure, eggs might be good to you, but they contribute to the early death of chickens. Now, in egg farms, chickens lay eggs, and then what happens? They hatch, and these cute little baby male chicks and female chicks are born. Now, once again, what do you do with the female? The female will eventually lay eggs, so she is allowed to live. What about the male? The male is useless, and therefore, hundreds of thousands of male chicks, like you see in this picture, are tossed into giant meat grinders, where they are ground alive, or they're suffocated, or they're gassed, or they're electrocuted even, and killed instantaneously. Now, but don't we need meat to survive? I talked about this before, and it seems to me clear that we don't need meat to survive. Once again, the government and along with the meat industry, where actually they work together to convince human beings that we need meat to survive. But we don't. We are not on a desert island in affluent societies like ours. We have no need to rely on animals for any kind of food, any sustenance. In fact, what's interesting is the fact that when you read the science, it is clear that consuming animal products is, in fact, the opposite, is deleterious. It's counterproductive to human health. You see how nowadays, essentially, virtually all scientists, all researchers recognize that there is a clear body of evidence that consuming animal products, especially meat, causes cancer, some type of cancer. Also, They recognize that dairy increases the risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and prostate cancer. Also, fish, seafood, is linked to cancer, where they do research and they research those communities that have a higher intake of fish. As the intake of fish goes up, also the rate of cancer goes up. And especially eggs. Well, not especially. And also eggs. Eggs contribute to cardiovascular disease and stroke. Why is that? Because they contain cholesterol, a lot of cholesterol. And so, and once again, as I said, it's not a surprise. Are you surprised that eggs cause cancer, and that's because they contain cholesterol? I am not surprised because it is not food. I would be surprised if they told me that eating mangoes causes cancer, but in fact it doesn't. But eggs, obviously, it's not a surprise. They are not food. They are reproductive cycles of chickens. Now, this is not to it's just to report what science essentially says. Now, and I want to remind you something very, very, very important. So pay attention. This is very important. These scientists conducting these experiments, collecting the data, asking questions, checking the blood, running experiments, they're not vegan or vegetarian scientists. These are scientists, period. They are people who eat meat. Some of them might be vegetarians, but most of these people, most of these researchers eat meat, and yet they come to the same conclusion. Now, when you talk about heart disease rate, for example, it's incredible, isn't it? Well, if you ask me, it's not incredible. If you ask me, it seems logical that when you wonder who is at high risk of heart disease, when you look at meat eaters, 50%, and also typically meat eaters are the ones who suffer from obesity. You'll rarely find vegetarians who are obese. Diabetes, higher BMI, higher weight in general, shorter lifespan. Essentially, vegetarians live longer and vegans even longer. But look at heart disease. Back to heart disease. Vegetarians, 15%. And then when you drop completely all the animal products, because vegetarians, as you know, consume eggs and milk and cheese. Essentially, they don't eat meat, but they consume animal products. Now, when you drop animal products completely, as you can see, we go to vegans, 4% chance of heart disease. It's amazing, isn't it? Also consider a very important study done in 2015 by the World Health Organization. This is the International Agency for Research on Cancer. This is an international organization, if you don't know it, the World Health Organization. And they concluded, as a result of the study, done using thousands of people, that meat, well, they divided animal products into groups from 1 through 4. In the first group, group 1, as you can see labeled as causes cancer, there's no question for these researchers. And once again, I want to remind you, the World Health Organization is not the same as PETA, okay? The people for the ethical treatment of animals. This is not a vegetarian organization. It is the World Health Organization. And they concluded that processed meats like bacon, salami, sausages, all kinds of processed meats, they are in group 1. Essentially, they cause cancer. To consume these kinds of foods, it is the same as smoking cigarettes. Causes cancer. Now, notice what's curious about group 2. Very interesting to me. Red meats have been given a group 2 classification, sorry. So pork, beef, lamb. This does not include chicken or fish, according to this study, but according to other studies, it does. But anyway, what I want to point out is the following. Eating pork, beef, lamb, according to this study, probably causes cancer. Now, I don't know you, but I don't want to eat anything that probably causes cancer. I want to eat food that definitely does not cause cancer. Does not cause cancer. Mangoes, blueberries, lettuce, spinach, okay, beans, chickpeas, and so on. How would you feel if I told you, eat this? And what is it? Don't worry, but it probably causes cancer. On the other hand, what does science say about those individuals, those crazy individuals who refuse, like myself, for example, who refuse ever, not even once, not even on the weekend, not even once a year, not even on Christmas or New Year's Eve, but ever, they categorically refuse to eat anything that comes from animals. And I mean eggs, cheese, milk, honey, meat. What does science say about people like me who refuse to eat any animal products? Well, let's read, I quote a study done by the American Dietetic Association. It is the position of the American Dietetic Association that total vegetarian or vegan diets, these are diets that exclude completely all animal and insect products. Such diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate. Now, this is the American Dietetic Association is not the American Vegan Association, okay? These are doctors and scientists who eat meat, okay? These are people that, like any other, okay? These are not vegetarians. And yet, they're arguing eating vegan diets is nutritionally adequate and may provide, this is very interesting, it may provide health benefits. So not only are they adequate, nutritionally adequate, but they also provide health benefits in the prevention of certain diseases. These diseases are cancer, diabetes, heart attack, heart disease, and so on. So well-planned vegetarian diets, that's the key, by the way. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence, and for athletes. Now think about this. According to the American Dietetic Association, and by the way, many other medical associations came to the same conclusion, so it's not just the American Dietetic Association. If you are a vegan or vegetarian, you will benefit from that diet, whether you are a pregnant woman, whether you're lactating, whether you are an infant babies can greatly benefit from a vegan diet. Childhood, adolescence, when you're growing, and also for athletes. There are many athletes who are vegan and they excel. Now, what I said before, the key is well-planned vegetarian diets, because now these scientists do not argue that any vegetarian diet will do. Let me give you an example. You eat French fries every single day, and you eat veggie burgers every single day. Then you drink alcohol, you drink coffee, you smoke cigarettes. Well, you are considered essentially a vegan. Have you ever thought about that? To be vegan is very easy. You just don't eat animal products. But what do you eat? Well, you eat anything. You eat fried food. Nowadays, if you don't know about this, probably you've been living under a rock, but nowadays you can go to a supermarket and purchase vegan cheese, vegan beef, vegan pork, vegan chicken, vegan anything. Now, of course, it doesn't taste like that, but there are what they call meat replacements. Also, if you know about the Impossible meat and Beyond Meat, they produce this meat that is supposed to taste exactly like beef, and it cooks like it. Now, are these foods conducive to good health? No, not necessarily. They're not as bad as eating meat, but they're not conducive to good health. They are full of fat, salt, and other chemicals, not really good for the human body. So when the American Dietetic Association is saying that vegan diets are prevent certain diseases and are nutritionally adequate, they are referring to eating quinoa, rice, millet, barley, legumes such as beans, lima beans, soybeans, chickpeas, and also vegetables, lettuce, chards, spinach, eggplant, squash, zucchini, artichokes, okay, potatoes, corn, and so on. Now, if you eat these foods, they are conducive to good health, or not to mention fruit, fresh fruit. If you choose to live your life differently, that's your problem. If your diet consists of wine, okay, a bottle of wine a day, and French fries, and chocolate and pastries, Like Hitler. I learned from reading a book that Hitler um, was obsessed by pastries. He hired a personal pastry chef because he was crazy for pastries. Um, things that have a lot of sugar, refined sugars, refined carbs. We know those things are not conducive to health. Whole foods are. Okay, so with this, I end part one of our lecture, and we will resume part two of lecture 10 with a discussion of sustainability and the impact of the animal industry, the animal agriculture on the environment. So I'll see you in part two.